My name is Zoe Aung, and what you're about to hear is not a made-up story. It's the testimony of my life, a testament to how God's power manifests itself even in the darkest and most desolate places. What I share with you is real. It's what I've experienced. It all began on a cloudy September morning in 2017, deep in the Kachin forest. Mist still clung to our village, Sinlum, and the cool morning air made everything seem calm, almost untouched. I was in the field, harvesting vegetables, when the sound of gunshots cut through the silence, bringing an icy chill that paralyzed my body. The sound of gunshots was like a distant echo, but soon turned into screams of panic that replaced the birdsong and the peace we once experienced. Myanmar's army, the dreaded Tatmadaw, had finally arrived. In Kachin, being a Christian has never been easy. Our country, deeply influenced by Theravada Buddhism, views our faith as a threat. Being a Christian here means living with a target on our backs, unsure whether the next step will lead to freedom or suffering. From a young age, I learned to keep my faith hidden, to not carry visible crosses when I left our region. Stories of missing Christians, burned churches, and tortured people were common in our ears, like whispers in every corner of the village. I clearly remember the day my father disappeared. I was only 15 and he was invited by the military authorities to a meeting. He never returned. His crime? Refusing to give up a piece of land belonging to our church for the construction of a military outpost. My mother, with a strength I would only understand many years later, was left alone to raise me and my two younger brothers, keeping our faith alive even as fear surrounded us, seeping into our home like dampness spreading through the wooden walls. When night fell and the village generator was turned off, darkness descended. But we weren't alone in those silent hours. My mother would gather us around a candle, and in a low, almost whispering voice, she would read passages from a Jinpao Bible that had belonged to my grandfather. A Bible many would consider forbidden, but for us it was the only light in the darkness. She used to say, "One day they will understand that our faith in Christ and our roots as Kachin people are inseparable. That is why they fear us." And those words remained engraved in my heart, for my father believed them with all his soul. If you've ever wondered about God's power to sustain us in the most difficult times, if you've ever wondered where He is when the fires of persecution rage around us, then this story is for you. Because I can assure you, there is no army so strong, no hatred so deep, no fire so immense that can separate us from the love of Christ. I've experienced this firsthand. What happened after the attack on our village was an experience that pushed me to the limit of my human endurance. The abyss between life and death at that moment seemed so small, a mere breath, but it was there. In that valley of shadow and death that I realized that God's light shines brightest when everything around us seems plunged into darkness. The Kachin Mountains, with their majestic peaks and impenetrable forests, have always been part of my world. I grew up surrounded by nature, in a simple but loving home. Our wooden houses were raised on stilts, protecting us from floods and even snakes. The sound of Manaw's festivals, where our elders danced around decorated pillars, was part of our culture. And of course, the music of our church, with its Christian hymns, always accompanied us. But life in Kachin wasn't just about the scenery, the festivities. It was about how our faith sustained us through every trial, every blow life dealt us. And even in the darkest days, God was always present, guiding us and giving us the strength to carry on. Now I look back and see how He stood by us, even when all seemed lost. Faith, which was given to us as a fragile flame, grew stronger and stronger, until it became a beacon of light even in the darkest places. I am Zoe Aung, and I am a living testament to the fact that even in the most trying times, Christ's love never abandons us. He is our strength, our hope, and our light, even when the world around us seems to be falling apart. Everything I experienced and learned, both from my father and my mother, shaped who I am, and it was engraved in me as an indestructible foundation. My father, Sautu, was a man of profound wisdom. He studied theology in Mandalay, and upon returning to our village, he was recognized as a deacon, respected by everyone around him. His dedication to our community was admirable. Not only we, his children, but even the neighboring predominantly Buddhist villages saw him as a man of integrity. My mother, Nanglum, played her own vital role. She was a teacher at the local school and taught Burmese and English to the village children. Her patience and love of education raised a generation of young people more aware of the world around them. In our home, Sundays were always a special day. We would walk together to the wooden church in the center of Sinum, and Mass was not only about worship but also about maintaining the unity of our Christian community in a country that seemed increasingly hostile. After the service, we would all gather to share a simple meal, each family bringing what they had. These moments of communion, of laughter and sharing were precious moments of pure joy. Today, looking back, they become almost like a distant dream, something that seems impossible now. but that God gave me to keep in my heart. This testimony is not just about suffering. I invite you to listen not just as a story of pain, but as a demonstration of God's transforming power. He sustained me through the darkest days of my life, and His presence can reach even the hearts most hardened by religious hatred. What I share below is a reminder of how God's love can penetrate even the most impenetrable barriers, especially those created by hatred. The change began subtly, but as time passed, it became clear that something was very wrong. In 2015, the military presence in our region began to grow. Until then, the army rarely ventured into the Kachin Mountains, but suddenly they were everywhere. Initially, we thought this had something to do with the struggle between the independent Kin army and the government. However, it soon became clear that something deeper was at play. My uncle Brangseng was the first to alert us. He had traveled to Myitkyina to sell some of our local produce. One quiet evening, he told us, "It's not just politics anymore. They're recruiting nationalist monks and holding meetings to assert that Myanmar is an exclusively Buddhist nation." His words stuck with me, as we knew this movement was growing. The Kachin, our people, began to be seen as foreigners, as Christians who posed a threat to the country's unity. The Mabata movement was gaining momentum, spreading the idea that being Burmese meant being Buddhist, and that all religious minorities like us were a danger. The climate of tension grew, and the advice we received became increasingly blunt. Don't travel alone. Always inform people of your plans and avoid religious discussions with strangers. What had once seemed paranoia now sounded like wisdom. In January 2016, the first attack came. A church in a neighboring village burned down. Officially, the fire was ruled an electrical accident, but we knew the truth. There was no investigation, only a stifled silence from the authorities, and a growing fear gripped everyone. I remember a specific moment when Maun, my childhood Buddhist friend, came to me. We used to fish together, but that day he came to warn me. "I can't keep coming here anymore," he said, looking at me as we cast our nets. "At the village meetings, they're saying that anyone who maintains friendship with Christians is a traitor. They're making lists of Christian families." The fear on his face was clear and his eyes were filled with shame. "My father forbade me from seeing you." His words were like a sharp blade cutting a piece of my soul. What had once been simple and pure friendship was now being criminalized. Those words were the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one of increasing persecution and fear. What was once the joy of our Sundays became a fight for the survival of our faith. God's love, however, was there in moments of pain, in moments of loss. He was always with us. Maun's words echoed in my mind for days, like a shadow that wouldn't lift. He said Christians were conspiring with the West to destroy Myanmar's culture. And from that moment on, we never fished together again. Our simple, uncomplicated friendship was shattered by the intolerance that was beginning to spread, even among those we once called friends. At school, the persecution took on more visible forms. Christian children like us began to be the target of constant bullying. My younger sister Nangun came home one day crying. She told me that her teacher had humiliated her in front of the entire class, asking why our family worshipped a foreign god instead of following Myanmar's traditions. I tried to explain that our Christian faith was part of our heritage, that it was a tradition that spanned generations, she said, but she called me a liar. And the sadness on my sister's face reflected the weight of words that carried much more than simple accusations. It was a clear attempt to diminish us, to erase who we were. Tensions grew. Authorities began visiting our churches, demanding detailed records. Our leader Salon tried his best to comply with these demands, believing that perhaps this would somehow protect us. But with each new list, the surveillance intensified, and our freedom shrank like a flower wilting under the relentless heat. Soon, families began taking turns attending services. The fear of being identified, of being singled out, was becoming a daily reality. In April 2017, 3 brothers from Monk, a neighboring village, were arrested on trumped-up espionage charges. Their families were kept silent for weeks. When one of the brothers was released, he was visibly scarred from the torture he had endured. The other 2 never returned. It was at that moment that my mother, with quiet strength, began to prepare us for what might come. At night, she would gather us around the table and teach us to memorize Bible verses. "If we are ever separated," she would say, tears in her eyes, "these words will be our comfort. No one can take away what we hold in our hearts." I didn't know what to expect, but in that moment, I realized that what was about to happen would change our lives forever. In the weeks that followed, we began preparing for the worst without directly discussing it. My mother sewed waterproof bags to store documents, money, and essential medicines. My brother, with a plan he kept secret, began mapping escape routes to China. I found myself practicing emergency routines with my family, always fearful that, at any moment, everything could be destroyed. The laughter that once filled the spaces of our home disappeared. Watchful glances and whispered conversations replaced the warmth of our daily encounters. The village elders began to take turns standing guard, vigilant, aware that danger was approaching. From our hill, we could see the military bonfires lit in the neighboring villages, a harbinger of things to come. One day we found red symbols painted on the homes of the village's Christians. There was no need to say anything. It was clear what was happening. That night, 3 families set off for Midquina without a backward glance. My father, with his quiet courage, insisted that we would stand together, that we would resist. "We have been here for generations," he said. "This land is our heritage, just as it is everyone else's in Myanmar. We will not abandon our homes nor our faith." Her words gave us strength, but I knew danger was at our door. We could no longer ignore the signs. The noose was tightening ever tighter. At night, I heard my parents talking in whispers, debating whether to stay or flee. In late August, one of Leisa's brothers, a family friend, paid a secret visit. His words were like a death sentence. "They've decided that Christianity is incompatible with their vision of a unified Myanmar. They're using religion to justify a systematic cleansing." When he left, the weight of the truth fell upon us. That night, my father finally broke down in tears. He knew the only way out was to leave our home. But what we didn't know, what we didn't yet understand, was that it was already too late. The Tatmadaw had begun operations in neighboring villages, and Sinlam was the next target. The day hell descended on our village began like any other. Morning dew glistened on the leaves as the women harvested the first tea crops. The children prepared for school, and the men checked their fishing traps as they always did. It seemed like nothing had changed, but in an instant everything fell apart. The attack was so sudden that we barely had time to comprehend what was happening. The sounds of gunfire and explosions filled the air, replacing the soft sound of leaves rustling in the wind. Hell had come to Sinlam, and with it, the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Nobody, absolutely nobody, imagined what was to come. Within hours, our village, which had always been our home, would be consumed by flames. The sound of the first gunshot echoed from the far south, and soon the reality of a nightmare began to take shape. I was with my mother, helping her in the kitchen, when screams began to fill the air. My father rushed in, his face etched with terror. "You came quickly. Take only the essentials," he said, and within minutes, our lives were plunged into irreversible chaos. My mother had already packed her bags, as if she knew deep down that something like this could happen. My older brother grabbed our little sister, and I stood frozen, unable to react until my father shook me and said, "Well, bye? Should we go now? Or are we all going to die?" We left through the back of the house just as the church began to burn. The sound of gunshots, the screams, the orders in Burmese, the crackling of burning houses. It was all a mixture of panic and destruction. In the midst of the chaos, I saw our neighbor, the Sow family, being dragged away by soldiers. Mr. Sow tried to resist, but the soldier brutally grabbed his daughter. The shot that killed him was clear and cruel. The memory of that sound has never left me. "Don't look back," my father said urgently. "Keep running no matter what." But how could we not look? How could we not see the pain all around us? I saw old Lulu, our elderly neighbor, being beaten for refusing to leave her home. I saw desperate children calling for their parents, who were probably already dead. And I saw our brother Saul Lon kneeling before the burning church, crying, "Why?" with his hands raised to the sky. An officer passed by and replied coldly, "We are the foreign disease infecting my Anna." That was the last I heard before the forest swallowed us. We ran. We ran, not knowing what awaited us, crossing a jungle that seemed increasingly dense and impenetrable. Other families were also fleeing, some carrying the wounded, others desperate like us. After a while, my father led us to a small cave, a temporary refuge, and from there we could see the devastation. Our village, our home, our church burning. The flames consumed everything, like a funeral pyre rising to the heavens. Soldiers far away moved meticulously, making sure nothing remained. As the afternoon wore on, more and more people joined us. Some, their faces swollen with pain, brought horrific stories. Young men forced to step on crosses before being executed. Women who suffered atrocities in front of their families. Elderly people burned alive because they couldn't run fast enough. Mrs. May, a woman who had always been present in my life, came to us alone, her face marked by loss. The soldiers separated the families, she told us, her voice weak and broken. Those who agreed to renounce their Christian faith and those who refused. Those who kept their faith were left behind. At that moment, a feeling of profound pain overcame me. We knew the attack wasn't just against our homes, our lands. It was an attack on everything we stood for. Our faith, our identity, our belief in a God who never abandons us, no matter the war around us. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if we would survive that night. But one thing was certain. No one could take away what we carried in our hearts. The strength of our faith, the conviction that, even amid persecution and pain, God was with us, was the only thing we had left. The rain, cold and incessant, felt like both a blessing and a curse. Although the drops of water refreshed us, the humidity made the ground slippery and our steps heavier. With every movement, the fear of being found gripped us. The darkness of the night enveloped us, but it also gave us the only protection we had: anonymity. I carried the supplies, but my heart was heavy. With every step, fear of the unknown consumed us. What else would we lose? We had already lost so much. I couldn't stop thinking about how everything we loved was being destroyed. The flames that consumed our village were still vivid in my memory, burning more than just the houses. They burned our safety, our peace, our faith. The images of our lands, our churches, and our loved ones being dragged away, humiliated, violated. These images haunt me to this day. Adi, despite being visibly injured, didn't stop. He led us with the same courage he always had, trying to keep everyone calm, encouraging them to keep going despite what we saw and what we knew could happen. He became our light on that dark night. Even through the pain and the blood flowing, he led us through the forest with impressive precision, though his voice had lost its vigor. "Silence," he whispered again. With every step, we felt the danger surrounding us, like a shadow stalking us. The sound of our footsteps seemed deafening in the stillness of the night, and the tall trees surrounding us seemed like observers, witnesses to our suffering. And then, amidst the cracking of branches and the relentless rain, we heard footsteps. We stopped in our tracks. Our hearts raced, and the silence grew even denser. We stood paralyzed, as if any movement would be the end. The sound of footsteps grew closer, but no one dared breathe. The slightest sound could be our doom. We stood there motionless, waiting for the hours to pass. I looked at the faces of the people around me. Old people, women, children, and saw the same terror in their eyes. But there was something else too. Something I couldn't explain at that moment, but which I felt deep within me. A silent strength, a will to continue, to resist, to not be defeated. The children, their small hands clutching their mothers, didn't cry. They understood what was at stake. As someone who is not only a victim of war, but also a reflection of their people's resilience, those children showed us that faith has no age. There, in those small hands, in their frightened eyes, was the strength to carry on. Adi, his face pale and his eyes teary with pain, signaled that it was time to continue. We knew we still had a long way to go. The refugee camp wasn't that far away, but reaching our destination without being discovered was a journey in itself. Adi knew this. He was making the decision for all of us. And we, despite our suffering, followed. As we moved away from immediate danger, the rain fell harder. It wasn't just the water drenching our bodies, but also the feeling that something inside us was fading. The physical pain was less severe than the emotional pain. That fear and anguish seemed more intense than any physical injury. But we knew we had to move forward. We couldn't turn back. We couldn't let everything our faith had built be destroyed without a fight. In those moments, I learned a lesson not found in books, not in the words my mother or father taught us. I learned that true faith is not the absence of fear, but the courage to press forward, even when the night is darkest and the dangers are greatest. Faith is not a promise that everything will be easy, but the certainty that, even in the abyss, God is with us. He was with us in every step we took, in every gasp we took, in every silent tear that fell. That night, darkness was our ally, but faith was what kept us alive. The weight of our losses still weighed heavily on us, but hope, the hope that we would get out of there, that we would reach our destination, and that somehow we would be restored, carried us forward. Our hearts were still broken, but the chains of fear began to loosen. The rain still fell, a blessing and a curse at the same time. The sound of the drops muffled our footsteps, but at the same time it made every movement more dangerous, as if nature were conspiring against us. In the silence of the night, only the whisper of the water and the soft sound of bodies trying to move silently, hiding, fleeing, could be heard. Markaun walked beside me, her face a mask of pain and exhaustion, her arms clutching a bundle to her chest. I looked at her, my eyes fixed on that small bundle, and fear tightened my chest. "Markaun, the baby," I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Her eyes stared at me blankly, wordless, and only then did I understand. The silence was louder than any scream. She had lost the child when the soldiers invaded our home. What she carried now was not just a memory, but a forced goodbye, an irreparable loss. The pain of losing a child is something no one should ever know, and yet here we all were, dealing with immeasurable loss. They showed no mercy. When I begged them not to shoot, I was ignored. There was no mercy in their eyes, and now the baby's silence permeated every step we took. At dawn, we reached a makeshift shelter, a cave hidden behind a waterfall, like a refuge from the storm we had left behind. The children were exhausted, and even in the midst of their pain, fell asleep. We took advantage of this moment of relative peace to gather the adults and make decisions about the future. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone knew what lay ahead would not be easy, but hope still lingered. Adi, with a high fever, tried to reassure us. He still had the strength to speak, but his body was clearly giving out. "We're 3 days from China," he said with a shaky voice, "but we need to use clandestine routes to avoid the military checkpoints. Any mistake now could be fatal." It was then that Lavia, always the more pragmatic one, asked a question that had been hanging in the air. "What about those who were deported to China? The refugees from Kachin?" My father replied with the serenity that only experience can bring. "Our only hope is to reach the international refugee camps near Nang." The journey continued to test us. Each day dragged on and the hardships only increased. On the second day, as we traversed steeper terrain, my mother, with her unique generosity, gave some of our meager supplies to a family with small children. I didn't understand. "Why would they do this?" I asked. "We barely have enough for ourselves." But she just looked at me and said, with the calm of someone who has outlived many, "Because Christ taught us that when we give to those in need, we give to Him. No matter how much we have, there is always someone who needs more." And it was there, under that incessant rain, that a lesson of faith was planted in my heart. A lesson I could never forget. It wasn't about what we had, but about what we were willing to give. Generosity comes not from abundance, but from the trust that in giving we also receive. When a helicopter passed overhead, low and menacing, fear crept in again. "They're searching for survivors," Adi said, his voice barely audible. "They have orders to clear the area. We can't be found." The helicopter circled above us for a long 20 minutes, and with every passing second, our chances of escape narrowed. When he finally walked away, a heavy weight fell upon us all. The feeling of being hunted, like animals in our own land, gripped the group. We were no longer inhabitants of our village. We were transformed into fugitives, shadows trying to escape the clutches of a fate that approached ever faster. On the third day, the scenery looked different. Thick fog blanketed the world around us, making everything even more difficult. A break to rest allowed us to hear something we hadn't even expected. Voices. Voices in our dialect. They were people. But who were they? Collaborators? Fugitives like us? We couldn't know, so we remained silent. One wrong move and death would overtake us. That night, Adi collapsed. The fever had taken hold of him and his breathing was shallow, barely perceptible. We couldn't afford to lose another one. He needed medical attention, but where could he find help out there, in the middle of nowhere? My father looked at Lavia, who was still carrying wounded men and children, and asked the crucial question, "How long to the border?" Lavia, her eyes weary, replied, "If we keep up a good pace, maybe a day's travel. But the wounded, it might be more difficult." And then, in that moment, the reality of our journey became even more cruel. The border was close, but the cost would be immense. And then Mac, always quiet, spoke with a clarity that surprised everyone. "We're going to bury my son here. I can't keep carrying him. I need my hands to help." It was a decision made at the edge of grief. A final goodbye, one that had no words, just the action of digging, of burying, of moving on. Under a tree, we dug a makeshift grave, and my father, his voice broken, prayed. He asked for strength for what was left of us. "Lord, receive this innocent child, and give us the strength to carry on." Mac kissed his son's forehead before covering him with earth. This was one of the most difficult moments of our journey. The love between parents and children cannot be destroyed by violence or death. It remains intact, even when there is nothing left to do. After that, something changed in Makaon. She moved forward with renewed determination, as if bearing her son had given her a purpose that grief alone could no longer provide. On the 5th day, we began to see signs that the border was getting closer. But as night fell, we heard gunfire ahead. They were blocking us. "It's an ambush," Lavia said, her voice somber. "They know us, an informant. We can't stay here." "Do you know another route?" my father asked, desperation evident in his voice. "There's a dangerous passage that smugglers avoid," Lavia replied. "I've lost friends there, but it might be our only option." It was with this desperate hope that we turned east, climbing a narrow, slippery trail with cliffs on one side. Mothers strapped their children to their backs and we continued on, knowing that the night still held unimaginable challenges for us. With each step, the weight of the journey grew heavier. The elderly, their faces scarred by life and pain, used branches as walking sticks, their trembling hands clinging to those small reminders of the life they had left behind. But as we advanced, something greater united us, an invisible chain that held us together, giving us the strength to carry on. It was during one of these difficult times that Nangra, the pregnant woman, slipped on a dangerous stretch of road. The slippery ground, treacherous as the situation itself, threatened to take her, but at the last second my brother grabbed her. It was as if fate had opened a loophole, allowing us all to unite in an effort to survive. With a single movement, our community grew stronger. "Thank you," she said, her eyes welling up, her hands protecting her belly. "My baby, thank you." Those words resonated within me in a way I could not express. I understood that in that moment our survival depended not just on us, but on each of us together. Our greatest triumph that night was refusing to leave anyone behind. We were alive because we clung to each other, stronger than any army, stronger than any pursuit. The sixth dawn found us in China, but we didn't know it immediately. Only when the road finally announced the news. Some fell to their knees at the sight of that different land, touching the ground as if it were a final refuge. But in our hearts, we knew we weren't safe yet. The crossing was far from complete. Our odyssey, in fact, had only just begun. As Christians in China, we were vulnerable refugees, constantly threatened with deportation back to Myanmar. As we crossed the border, a new wave of fear gripped us. Now we feared not only the Burmese army, but also the Chinese authorities. The terror of being discovered and taken back to that relentless war slowly consumed us. Adi, though already weak from fever and exhaustion, continued to guide us with a strength only the most desperate can muster. During a brief respite, he whispered to us almost as if it were a revelation. There's a Christian network that helps refugees. My uncle found refuge through them last year. These simple thoughts became our anchors, but even so, we continued cautiously, with the feeling that any misstep could be our last. Avoiding main roads and villages was one of the unspoken rules we all followed. We slept during the day among bamboo groves and only moved at night when the shadows embraced us. Fatigue, fear, and longing made us nearly invisible, but at the same time they made us stronger. The children, poor things, learned to grieve in silence. The pain of seeing a small human being bow to the void, trying to suppress tears, tore at my soul. I don't know if it's possible to describe how it changed us. On our second day in China, Lavia warned us in a grave tone, her voice thick with tension. They're searching for refugees. We found traces of border patrols. And so, we were forced to detour east. The path was more difficult, more rugged, but we preferred the challenges of the terrain to the risk of capture. The fear of being found and handed over again to those who destroyed our lives drove us forward. On the third day, we finally spotted a Chinese village in the distance. From where we stood, we could see the electricity, the houses intact, the people moving freely, unburdened by the constant fear that haunted us. "Do you think we'll ever have a normal life again?" I asked my father, anguish brimming in my words. He looked at me, his gaze filled with pain, but also with a quiet hope. "Normal, maybe not, but we will find a new life." And then, in that moment, like a gentle echo of the faith that guided us, he spoke words that I don't know if any of us could truly understand, but that somehow gave us the courage to move forward. "Son, God did not bring us this far to abandon us." That phrase was etched deep in my heart. Sometimes pain makes us lose our sight, but faith, however small, however hidden in some corner of the soul, becomes the light that guides us. On the fourth day, an unexpected storm swept through the region. The rain seemed endless, soaking our bodies to the bone. And then another blow. Nanglum, a 70-year-old woman, slipped and fractured her ankle. The group faced a terrible dilemma: continue and risk her life or stop and risk ours. But my father, without hesitation, said, "We'll carry her." We couldn't leave anyone behind. The sacrifice of one was the sacrifice of all. So we improvised a stretcher with branches and clothes, and taking turns, we carried Nanglum, who screamed silently in pain, but not in hopelessness. This united us once again, showing that humanity is not lost, even in the most inhumane circumstances. We were alive not because we were strong or fast, but because our compassion, our solidarity, our faith kept us strong. We continued on, each with our own pain, each with our own story, but together. And somehow, that gave us the strength to carry on. Tomorrow once again was an unknown. But somehow we knew that, at least in that moment, we were not alone. The journey continued, but it was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight to keep hope, love, and faith alive, even in the face of seemingly immeasurable pain. On the fifth day, with an increasingly slow pace but unwavering determination, the Director General led us to a stream where we would find a contact. The hours of waiting passed slowly, the tension growing with each passing minute. The stream's waters, which had once seemed a relief, now only intensified our anxiety. As the sun began to set, a middle-aged Chinese man appeared. "I'm Li Wei," he said with a forced smile and a slight accent. The first thing I noticed was his use of the local dialect, broken but sincere. "I work with the church in Really," he explained, his deep voice breaking the silence. "We were warned about your arrival." Lavia, ever cautious, wasted no time in questioning him suspiciously. "How do we know you won't turn us over to the authorities?" The question hung in the air, heavy and filled with fear. Li Wei didn't hesitate. Calmly, he rolled up his sleeve and with a simple gesture revealed a cross tattooed on his forearm. The symbol, marked with the pain and faith of someone unafraid to speak his mind, spoke 1,000 words. "Because before I was Chinese, I was Christian," he said, his gaze firm. "And Christ taught us to love our neighbors as ourselves." In that moment, the fear we'd carried for days seemed somehow softened. He wasn't just a stranger. He was a brother in Christ, someone who shared our pain and would risk his life to help us. That night, Li Wei took us to a secluded farm. For the first time in days, our stomachs didn't ache with hunger. Our bodies were dry, and most importantly, we were safe. There, we received what we seemed to have lost, a sense of humanity. Medical attention was provided to Adi, who no longer had the strength to continue, and Nanglum's ankle was properly immobilized. It was as if, in this simple place, life was once again trying to give us a chance. The farm belonged to a Chinese Christian family who had risked everything to help us. Many have passed through here, Mrs. Sao explained as she served us rice. Some went to the refugee camps, others found work in the mountains. And as her words filled the space with an almost unbelievable calm, we all knew we were in this place for a reason greater than we could have imagined. We spent 3 days on the farm, recovering our strength. They were the most peaceful 3 days since the attack. During that time, for the first time since that hellish day, we held a service in the barn. By the light of oil lamps, our voices rose in hymns. In the midst of that darkness, we felt God's presence, as if He Himself were holding us in His hands. It was a small piece of heaven in a broken world. On the 4th day, Li Wei brought the news we'd been waiting for with a mixture of relief and apprehension. "A truck will take us to the refugee camp tonight," he announced. "It won't be a comfortable trip. You'll have to hide under tarps and cargo. There will be checkpoints." Apprehension gripped us, but there was also a sense of movement, of hope. At least we were going somewhere that perhaps would offer us a chance for a fresh start. As we packed our bags, my little sister asked with the innocence only children possess, "Will we ever return?" My mother hugged her, and in a soft but faith-filled voice, she replied, "Our home goes wherever we go, little one." And with a sigh, she added, "One day, when peace returns to Kashin, we will visit the land of our birth." That night, 32 of us, all Christians from Kashin, squeezed into the back of a truck. Bags of rice and crates of vegetables were piled on top of us, trying to hide our presence. The journey, long and cramped, dragged on through the night. The silence was heavy. Twice the truck stopped at checkpoints, for those minutes that seemed to last an eternity. We held our breath, praying silently, hoping no one would find us. With our hearts in our throats, we listened to the guards' flashlights illuminating the cargo. Thank God they weren't searching for people hiding. When the truck finally stopped at dawn, the tension seemed to have torn through our bodies. But when the tarps were removed, we were greeted by a place that seemed for a brief moment to be our final destination. We were in front of a refugee camp, a complex of simple buildings surrounded by a low fence. Flags of international organizations fluttered, offering a promise of temporary safety. "Welcome to Nonkangang Refugee Camp," Li Wei announced with a tired but hopeful smile. "You'll be safe here." When we stepped out of the truck and saw the field before us, something inside me snapped. Hundreds of grim faces watched us. They were our compatriots, those who, like us, had fled the same persecution. Brother, listening, in that moment I understood what it means to be part of a collective exodus. We weren't just 32 displaced people. We were just a drop in a vast sea of faith and suffering, part of an entire people who, because of their faith, had become the target of relentless persecution. The Nonkangang refugee camp became our home for the next few months. It was a place of makeshift shelters where each family crammed into small spaces, trying to find some semblance of dignity. The tents, made of simple materials, were the only shelter we had, and within them lay our broken lives, but also the hope of a new beginning. In the first few days in the field, adaptation was the biggest challenge. Everything was new, everything was different. But at the same time, the feeling of finally being safe brought immediate relief. The rules were strict, almost impassive. Curfews, restricted movement, and no unauthorized exits. We weren't prisoners, but we weren't free either. "This place is like limbo," my father commented one night as we divided our rations. It was a hard truth to swallow. That space, which should have been a refuge, was also a silent prison. We weren't in our homeland, but we weren't completely accepted there either. Yet despite the limitations, there was something fundamental we had lost and now found again: safety. International organizations strove to offer us what they could: food, basic medical care, and in some cases, educational opportunities for the children. The humanitarian workers were tireless, though exhausted. Every day, new refugees arrived and the lines for food and medical services grew longer. But there was something about them that touched us deeply: compassion. A compassion that seemed in stark contrast to the brutality we had left behind. My mother found a way to cope with the pain and emptiness surrounding her. She began helping with food distribution, finding solace in serving others. My sister, despite everything, found some semblance of normalcy by attending makeshift classes under a tent. I, in turn, volunteered to help with translation. My English, though rudimentary, was better than many, so I began translating for those who needed assistance, whether to understand important information or to communicate with the foreign volunteers. Life in the camp began to take on a rhythm of its own. Mornings were marked by long lines for food and water, a constant reminder of our vulnerability. The days passed with community chores, a few informational meetings, and a constant wait for news from Myanmar, news of our loved ones. There was a heavy silence in the camp, a silence broken only by the murmur of conversation or the cries of children. At night, we tried to keep our culture alive. It was a way of resisting, of maintaining some sense of identity. Elders told stories, taught traditional Kachin songs to children, and grandmothers passed on the legends of our mountains. Even amidst the suffering, we still preserved something no one could take from us: our history, our roots. Faith became the center of our community in exile. There was no formal church, but we gathered in makeshift spaces, often in small tents or around a campfire. Prayers now had a different, deeper weight. Hymns, once familiar, now seemed to have an intensity we had never experienced before. In a place with no clear future, faith was the only thing that still gave us hope. Despite the tears and the pain, a firm determination united us. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." These words, which we had once spoken almost without thinking, now became a collective cry, an affirmation that we would not be defeated. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." We felt his presence, even in the midst of darkness. But like everything in a refugee's life, safety was also temporary. About a month after our arrival, we discovered that not everyone in the camp was treated equally. Those with useful skills or contacts abroad had a chance at resettlement. For the rest of us, the future was uncertain, dependent on the goodwill of both Chinese and international authorities. The constant threat of deportation hung over us like a dark cloud. The camp, which for a moment seemed like our safe haven, became an invisible prison where any mistake could mean the end of our chance to start over. Visits from Chinese authorities were regular, and rumors of refugees being sent back to Myanmar constantly surfaced. With each inspection, a collective panic gripped the camp. The mere approach of an official vehicle made our hearts race. Every time someone passed, it felt like our fate hung in the balance, and fear, like an invisible shadow, enveloped us. My father, ever practical, began planning alternatives. "We need to be prepared for anything," he told us gravely. "If we need to split up, we'll meet at the church near the market in shifts." He knew that in a place like this, anything could happen, and we needed to be ready. It was during this period of uncertainty that I met Sam, a boy my age. He was there in the same camp with a similar story to ours. His village had been attacked 2 weeks before ours, and now he, along with the rest of his family, was facing an uncertain future. Sam became someone I could trust, someone with whom I shared not only my losses but also my hopes, however faint. Sam spoke with a calm that only someone who had lived through what he had experienced could possess. He was the kind of person who, even after losing everything, still found a reason to carry on, to help, to keep going. His answer, simple and profound, hit me like a punch in the gut. "Part of me is still there." Those words stayed with me. He wasn't completely healed nor completely at peace, but he was trying, one step at a time. I watched him, and somewhere inside me, a glimmer of hope began to rekindle. Like him, each morning was a small victory, one day at a time. And in helping others, he found purpose, something beyond the pain that consumed him. His resilience became a beacon, guiding us along a road filled with darkness. I learned from him almost silently that no matter how much the world around you crumbles, you can find the strength to carry on if you have something or someone to hold on to. The months in the camp passed in a blur of suffering and survival. Our hearts, so hopeful at first, began to wear thin with monotony and uncertainty. The stories we began to hear back in Kachin confirmed our fears. The cleansing operations had not stopped. Villages were being destroyed one by one, and the IDP camps were overcrowded, making it even clearer that we would not be able to return, at least not in the immediate future. The decision to accept our situation or fight for greater freedom weighed heavily on our hearts. For some, the relative safety of the camp was a solace, a temporary peace. For others, like my father and me, it was impossible to accept that this would be our final fate. We were ready for more, but what else was there to do? Then came the disease. It began simply with fever in the children, but it spread quickly like wildfire. The camp, already exhausted and with limited resources, was unable to contain the epidemic. The makeshift infirmary soon filled up. The beds were full, and the doctors, few in number, tried to do the impossible. My little sister was among the first to fall ill. I watched her struggle to breathe, her body burning as she coughed with a force that seemed to drain her life with each spasm. The doctor, a Filipino volunteer, explained that she needed urgent antibiotics, but supplies were already scarce. "It could take days for us to get more," he said with a helpless expression. That night, as I sat beside my sister, trying to calm her, the darkness of my faith enveloped me like a thick, suffocating cloud. "Why, Lord? Haven't we suffered enough? Why punish the innocent?" It screamed inside me. For the first time, I felt as if God were far away, as if he had withdrawn from us, from me. Disease was taking over the countryside, and with each new case, death approached with silent steps. First, it was 2 elderly people, then a baby, and soon a pregnant woman. The pain spread like a plague, and as each life was extinguished, something within us was extinguished too. It was my mother, always so strong and protective, who made me see the fragility of life. She too fell ill. Her strength slowly faded before my eyes, and seeing her vulnerability shattered me. My mother, the woman who had always been the pillar of our family, was now being consumed by the disease. I saw her tremble, weaken, and everything I had ever thought safe and strong seemed to crumble before my eyes. I couldn't take it anymore. The tears I'd been holding back all those months finally came pouring out, flowing like a merciless river. I went to the corner of the field and screamed until I could no longer speak, cursing the world, the Burmese regime, and most of all myself. "Where is God?" I asked the void. "Why has he abandoned us?" It was Sam who found me there. He knew what I was feeling, and unhurriedly he sat down beside me. "I've been where you are too," he said, his voice calm and serene, as if the words were coming from a deep place, something only pain can teach. That dark place where you doubt everything, even God. I don't know what I expected to hear, but the sincerity in his voice made me pause for a moment. "How did you get out of this place?" I asked, my voice filled with desperation. He was silent for a moment, then answered with a depth only those who have lived it could understand. "I haven't left completely. Part of me is still there. But I've learned that faith doesn't mean the absence of doubt. It means moving forward, even with doubt. And there, in the midst of suffering, in the ruins of our hope, I understood what Sam meant. Faith is not a shelter immune to suffering. It doesn't stop us from questioning, from doubting, from crying out. But it teaches us to keep going, even when the road seems impossible to travel." When the medicine finally arrived, the hope that was kindled was brief. Many had already passed away. My sister, thank God, survived, but her recovery was slow. My mother also began to recover, but her body was still fragile. Others, however, were not so lucky. I lost count of how many old people, women and children were buried around the camp. 17 souls left this world. Words of comfort were no longer enough. That moment revealed the best and at the same time the worst in us. We saw people risking their lives to care for the sick, but we also saw the fears of some that led them to isolate themselves or worse, steal from others. One night, while attending the funeral of a young mother, an old man whispered, with a distant and lost look in his eyes, "Perhaps it would have been better for us to die in our land than to face all this pain." His despair remained with me, but at that moment my father gathered some families and, with a firm and calm voice, reminded us of who we truly were. He spoke of the struggles of our people, of the years of persecution, of wars, of famine, of disease. "We have always survived, and with God's help, we will always resist." His words did not soften our pain, but they provided a framework for understanding it. We were not suffering without purpose. Our suffering was a testament to our resilience, our faith, our identity. Little by little, life on the farm began to return to normal, but something had changed in all of us. Smiles were no longer as frequent. Looks were more cautious, heavier. Faith, once simple, became more complex, but also deeper. It was no longer the faith of those who didn't know what it was to suffer, but of those who knew the weight of pain and still chose to trust. When the epidemic finally began to ease, something seemed to have shifted in the countryside. Perhaps it was the struggle against death that somehow united hearts, or perhaps it was the simple passage of time, slowly healing invisible wounds. Desperation gave way to calm. Tensions eased, and finally, a new kind of determination began to blossom. It was in this context that one day, Leeway, one of our contacts, brought us news that shook us all. A Christian organization in Thailand had offered to resettle 50 families. There were centers for refugees of our ethnicity, offering programs for education, work, and temporary legal status. This opportunity divided us all. For some, it would mean abandoning our land, our culture, our history. For others, it would be a chance to start over, to rebuild our lives. Within our family, opinions were sharply divided. My mother, always thinking about her children's future, supported the idea. For her, this was a chance for us to stabilize, to secure a better future. But my father, with his careful and cautious gaze, still hesitated. He feared that by leaving, we would lose something fundamental, our identity. How will we maintain who we are? How will we pass on our culture and our faith to our children if we leave our homeland? He asked worriedly. It was then that Misuk, a respected elder, spoke words that would change the course of our decision. Our identity is not in the land we walk on, but in what we carry within us. Moses led his people through the desert for 40 years, and they never lost who they were. The promised land was there, but the true promise lay in faith and commitment to one another, he said. These words echoed deeply in our hearts. It wouldn't be an abandonment, but a way to honor our heritage. We wouldn't lose our identity if we decided to move forward. On the contrary, By preserving our faith and values, we would be keeping the teachings of our ancestors alive. A month later, we received confirmation that we would be one of the 50 families to be resettled. When the news arrived, the camp fell silent, as if the news was slowly sinking in. But then something unexpected happened. A spontaneous celebration began. It began with a short prayer of thanksgiving, but soon turned into a party filled with music, traditional dances, and stories told around makeshift bonfires. It was as if the people's joy was a form of resistance. And so it was that in that moment of uncertainty, when the future still seemed cloudy, we found a new form of hope. Even in exile, our community remained strong. No matter what the future held, our true home was in our hearts, in the faith and unity we shared. Laughter, something not heard in a long time, filled the air again that day. Children were learning traditional tag dances from their elders, who were having fun while passing on a piece of our culture. Mothers, with the few ingredients they could find, prepared simple sweets, but made with great care. It was as if the taste of that sweetness held an even greater value, a taste of endurance. In that moment, I understood something profound. Our faith was not only a faith of suffering and endurance, but also of celebration. Celebration even in the face of hardship. Joy, however fleeting, became a form of resilience. We sang together that night, our voices rising, shattering the silence of the camp with profound worship. This is the day the Lord has made. We will be glad and rejoice in it. And there in the darkness of the night, I felt that our faith was no longer just tied to survival, but also to the full life we chose to live, even in exile. The next morning, the bus that would take us to Thailand was ready. Before we left, we gathered for a final prayer. Each family was blessed by the elders and given a small wooden cross, a symbol of our faith, to carry on our journey. I gazed at the field, trying to engrave every detail in my memory. It was a reminder of our temporary refuge, our safe haven in the storms of life. Now we set out into the unknown, but with one certainty: we would not be alone. God has been with us every step of the way, and He will continue to be, my mother whispered, squeezing my hand tightly. Her voice was not one of fear, but of renewed hope. A hope forged by pain, but also by the certainty that, even in the darkest nights, God's light will always find a way to shine. The journey took 3 days. We crossed the border without incident, thanks to the support of the Christian organization that was helping us. When we arrived at the refugee center in Chiang Mai, Thailand, we were warmly welcomed. Local and Western staff briefed us on the center, and the difference was remarkable. The place was well structured, with adequate schools, a modern clinic, and small individual houses that provided some privacy. More than that, there was a sense of permanence, something that allowed us to look beyond daily survival and imagine a new life. My father, with his skilled hands, soon found work as a carpenter. My mother, with her talent and love of tradition, began teaching embroidery to other refugee women. My sister, after months of suffering, finally smiled again as she resumed her regular classes. I, in turn, became involved in the local church, helping new refugees adapt to life in this new place. Life wasn't perfect, of course. Refugee status still imposed limitations, and discrimination existed, albeit disguised in more subtle ways. The longing for our homeland never disappeared, especially among the elders who held the Kachin Mountains in their hearts. But there was one thing we couldn't deny. There was peace, security, and the opportunity to build something new. Our community, the Kachin community, flourished in this new environment. We celebrated our traditional festivals, spoke our language, and shared our culture with the local Thais, who gradually became part of our history. The church, which was our first point of welcome, soon became not only our spiritual, but also our social and cultural center. It was our stronghold, our place of unity and identity. A year after our arrival, we received news from our homeland. The situation in Kachin remained dangerous for the Christians, but it was clear to us that our decision to leave had been the wisest. "Do you think we'll ever be able to return?" my sister asked as we gazed at the stars from our small garden. The answer came from me with a deep sigh. "I don't know, but in the meantime, let's build a life that honors all we left behind." Over time, I learned that being a refugee wasn't our identity, but a temporary circumstance. We weren't defined solely by pain and loss, but by faith, hope, and a commitment to our values. We were still Kachin. We were still Christians. And now we were part of a larger global community. The fear that once paralyzed us was replaced by renewed courage. The last time I saw Sam, he was teaching traditional music to other refugee children. "Every song you teach," he told me, "is a piece of our home, which we hold dear in our hearts." And so, our story is not over. It continues to be written in every prayer we offer, in every tradition we keep alive, in every new dawn we face with renewed faith and hope. Persecution may have tried to silence us, but our voices have not ceased. They continue to rise as a testimony that, despite adversity, God's light never abandons us. Amen.